If you have ever been through a real breakup, the kind where you lose not just a person but a whole imagined future, a daily rhythm, a version of yourself you only existed as inside that relationship, then you already know that the word heartbreak is not exaggerating. The chest actually aches. The appetite disappears, or the opposite, you eat without tasting anything. You wake up in the middle of the night and for 1/2 second everything is fine, and then it lands again. You find yourself doing things that make no logical sense, checking their social media, wearing their sweatshirt, replaying a conversation from 18 months ago looking for the moment where it started to go wrong. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, someone, well-meaning, probably, tells you that time heals everything. Or that there are plenty of fish in the sea. Or that you'll get over it. And you think, you have no idea. Here's what I want to offer today, not platitudes. Not a timeline. Not a list of things to keep yourself busy. What I want to offer is the actual science of what happens to the brain and the body during heartbreak, because understanding it changes how you relate to it, and the evidence-based tools that psychological research, including the pioneering work of Dr. Winch, tells us genuinely help the healing process move. This video is for two people. It's for the person who is in it right now, in the thick of loss and wondering if this feeling is ever going to lift. And it's for the clinician or therapist who sits across from that person and wants to offer them more than empathy alone, as essential as empathy is. Two resources I've created to complement this video are linked in the description: a Heartbreak and Breakups cheat sheet rooted in Guy Winch's work, and a set of 36 journal prompts for navigating a breakup. They're there when you're ready. For now, let's start with the truth about what's actually happening when a heart breaks. Section 1. Why breakups hurt so much, the neuroscience, 2 o'clock to 4:30. The first thing to understand about heartbreak, and one of the most validating things science has to offer, is that the pain is not in your head. Or rather, it is in your head, but in the most literal neurological sense, it activates the same regions of the brain as physical pain. Researchers at the University of Michigan used fMRI imaging to study people who had recently experienced unwanted breakups and found that viewing a photo of the person who rejected them activated the same neural regions involved in the experience of physical pain, specifically the secondary somatosensory cortex and the dorsal posterior insula, areas associated with the sensory experience of pain intensity. Heartbreak, neurologically, is not like pain. It is pain. This matters. It matters because one of the most damaging things people do in the aftermath of a breakup, to themselves and to each other, is to minimize it. To treat it as something that should be resolved quickly, privately, and without too much visible distress. To apply the same impatience to emotional injury that we would never dream of applying to a physical one. We don't tell someone with a broken leg to just walk it off. But we routinely communicate, through social norms, through the people around us, through our own internal critic, that heartbreak should be handled faster and more quietly than it actually can be. The neuroscience also helps explain something that many people find deeply confusing and embarrassing about the early stages of heartbreak: the addiction-like quality of longing for the person who hurt you. Research using neuroimaging has shown that the early stages of romantic love activate the brain's dopaminergic reward system, the same system involved in addiction. When that source of reward is suddenly removed, the brain responds not unlike a system in withdrawal. The craving is real. The compulsive checking, the reaching out, the replaying, these are not signs of weakness or lack of self-respect. They are the predictable responses of a reward system that has lost its primary source of stimulation and hasn't yet recalibrated. Dr. Guy Winch, the psychologist and author whose work forms a core framework for the cheat sheet linked in the description, has argued compellingly that we do not treat heartbreak with the same seriousness we treat other psychological wounds, and that this gap, this absence of what he calls emotional first aid, is one of the primary reasons healing from heartbreak takes so much longer than it needs to. Understanding that the pain is neurologically real, that the craving has a biological basis, and that healing requires active intervention rather than passive time passing is the foundation from which everything else in this video builds. Section 2. The grief of a breakup is not linear, 4:30 to 7 o'clock. Grief is the appropriate word for what happens after a significant relationship ends, and it is a word worth claiming, because there is still a cultural tendency to reserve it for death. But the losses in a breakup are real and numerous, and they deserve to be grieved as such. You are not only grieving the person. You are grieving the future you built in your imagination, the version of your life that had them in it. You are grieving the daily rituals that structured your time and your sense of belonging. You are grieving the identity you inhabited inside that relationship, the way you were as a partner, the way you were seen, the specific version of yourself that only existed in that relational context. You may be grieving the loss of mutual friends, shared spaces, familiar routines. In some cases, you are grieving the family you thought you were building, or the life chapter you thought you were in. These are substantial losses, and they do not resolve on a schedule. The model most people have inherited for grief, the Kubler-Ross 5 stages, was never designed to be a linear roadmap, though it is almost universally misunderstood as one. What the research on grief actually shows is that it is oscillating, non-linear, and highly individual. There are days that feel like progress, followed by days that feel like collapse. There are moments of genuine lightness, followed by waves that come from nowhere, a song, a smell, a season, an ordinary Tuesday, that knock the breath out of you all over again. This is not regression. This is grief doing what grief does. What is also true is that grief has a way of activating older losses. A breakup in the present can open doors to griefs from the past, attachment wounds from childhood, earlier relational losses, the accumulated weight of every time you trusted and were hurt. This is particularly important for therapists to hold. The client who seems to be responding disproportionately to a relationship that lasted 8 months may be grieving something that started 20 years before they met the person. The invitation, for the person in it and for the people supporting them, is to resist the urge to rush the process and instead to offer it the same compassionate, patient witnessing that we would offer any real wound. Which leads us to the behaviors that make that hardest. Section 3. The mistakes that keep people stuck, 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock. Guy Winch's framework for emotional first aid after heartbreak identifies several common behaviors that feel like coping but actually function to maintain and deepen the wound. Understanding these is not about self-blame, it's about recognizing patterns that are understandable, even predictable, given what the brain is doing, and having the information to make different choices. The first and most consequential is rumination. Rumination is the mental process of replaying, going over and over the relationship, the ending, the specific moments where things went wrong, the what-ifs and the if-onlys and the whys. It feels like processing. It feels like you're working on something, like you're close to arriving at an understanding that will finally make sense of all of it. But the research is unambiguous. Rumination does not produce insight. It produces more rumination. It maintains and amplifies emotional pain without moving it. Every loop through the same thoughts deepens the neural groove of distress rather than resolving it. Winch is particularly focused on a subset of rumination he calls the search for self-blame, the relentless interrogation of one's own role in the relationship's failure with the implicit goal of arriving at a comprehensive accounting of personal fault. There is a difference between genuine reflection, the kind that produces growth and self-understanding, and the punishing loop of self-examination that is really just another form of self-inflicted pain. The former has an endpoint. The latter does not. The second major trap is idealization of the lost partner. In the aftermath of a breakup, the mind has a powerful tendency to selectively recall the best of what was lost, the early days, the moments of real connection, the version of the person that existed in the relationship's best chapters, while filtering out the reasons it ended, the incompatibilities, the chronic frustrations, the ways the relationship was not actually working. This is not dishonesty. Is the reward system in withdrawal, amplifying the positive memory of the drug to intensify the craving for it. But it keeps healing at arm's length, because you cannot grieve and let go of a relationship that your mind is actively reconstructing as perfect. Social media monitoring is the modern amplifier of both of these patterns. Every check of an ex-partner's profile is a small reactivation of the attachment system, a hit that briefly relieves the craving and reliably makes it worse. The evidence on this is clear. Maintaining digital contact, even passive observation, significantly prolongs the distress and delays emotional recovery. This is one of the most practically important pieces of information in Winch's work, and one of the hardest for people to act on. And finally, suppression. The attempt to not feel what you're feeling, to stay busy enough, distracted enough, publicly composed enough that the grief doesn't have an opening to surface. This is different from healthy distraction, which is temporary and chosen. Suppression is chronic and exhausting, and it tends to make the grief louder when it finally does break through, not quieter. Healing requires that the emotional experience be felt, not indefinitely, but genuinely, and suppression is the strategy that most reliably prevents that from happening. Section 4. Emotional First Aid. What actually helps, 10 o'clock to 1300. If rumination, idealization, social media monitoring, and suppression are the behaviors that maintain the wound, the question is, what are the behaviors that allow it to heal? Winch's framework of emotional first aid offers several evidence-based answers. The first is creating distance, specifically, the intentional reduction of contact with reminders of the relationship. This includes, crucially, digital contact. Winch is direct about this. Checking a former partner's social media is functionally equivalent to calling them. It reactivates the attachment, resets the craving cycle, and interrupts the neural process of letting go. Unfollowing is not drama. It is emotional first aid. The brain cannot begin to update its internal model of the relationship while it is still receiving live data from the person it lost. The second is actively addressing idealization, which requires a specific kind of intentional cognitive intervention. Winch suggests what he calls creating a realistic relationship inventory, a deliberate practice of recalling not only the best of the relationship but also the genuine frustrations, the incompatibilities, the things that were actually hard, the needs that were consistently unmet. This is not cynicism, and it is not disrespecting the relationship. It is allowing the brain to hold a complete picture rather than the partial, idealized one that the withdrawal process amplifies. The third is self-compassion, and this one deserves particular emphasis because it is so reliably absent in the way people treat themselves after heartbreak. Kristen Neff's research on self-compassion consistently shows that it is associated with faster emotional recovery from painful experiences, not slower. The inner critic that says you should be over this by now, that you're pathetic for still hurting, that you did this to yourself, this voice does not accelerate healing. It impedes it. Treating yourself with the same warmth and patience you would offer a close friend in the same pain is not indulgence. It is one of the most empirically supported things you can do. Allowing grief, really allowing it, in contained, intentional doses, is also essential. This means creating specific time and space to feel the loss rather than either suppressing it indefinitely or being overwhelmed by it in every moment. The practice of titrated grief exposure, letting yourself feel, then returning to functioning, is the rhythm of healthy mourning. It moves the emotional material rather than freezing it in place. And rebuilding routines is clinically significant in a way that sounds mundane but isn't. Relationships don't just provide emotional connection, they provide temporal structure, daily rhythm, shared rituals that organize the day. When a relationship ends, all of that structure disappears simultaneously. Rebuilding deliberate routines, new ones, yours, is not just self-care. It is literally reconstructing the scaffolding of a daily life. Section 5. Rebuilding identity after a relationship ends, 1300 to 1530. One of the most disorienting and underaddressed dimensions of breakup grief is the identity loss, the dissolution of the self that existed inside the relationship. Research by Arthur Aaron on self-expansion theory demonstrates that in close relationships, we genuinely incorporate aspects of our partner into our own self-concept. We take on some of their interests, their ways of seeing, their social worlds. We become, in some partial but real sense, a larger self inside the relationship than we were outside it. When the relationship ends, that expanded self contracts, and the contraction is felt as a loss of self, not just a loss of the other person. This helps explain the disorienting experience many people describe after a significant breakup, not just sadness about losing the person, but a destabilizing uncertainty about who they are now. What do I actually like, separate from what we like together? What are my opinions, my preferences, my ways of spending time, when they're not organized around someone else? Who am I in a social world that used to have them at the center? The work of rebuilding identity is not a secondary concern or something to address after the grief has resolved. It is part of the healing, and it requires active engagement rather than passive recovery. This is where journaling becomes clinically powerful. The act of writing, exploring your own interiority with curiosity rather than self-criticism, is one of the most effective tools for identity reconstruction after relational loss. James Pennebaker's decades of research on expressive writing consistently show that writing about difficult emotional experiences produces measurable improvements in both psychological and physical well-being. The 36 journal prompts I've created for navigating a breakup, linked in the description, are designed specifically for this work. They move through grief and loss, through the relationship itself, and into the territory of self-reclamation. Who you are, what you want, what you learned, and who you're becoming on the other side of this. Writing is not passive. It is one of the most active things a healing person can do. Section 6, The Role of Rumination, and How to Interrupt It, 1530 to 1730. We touched on rumination as one of the behaviors that keeps people stuck, but it deserves its own section, because it is so common, so seductive, and so amenable to specific intervention. Rumination feels productive because it mimics reflection. It has the quality of working on something. But the distinguishing feature of rumination, as opposed to genuine processing, is that it is repetitive without resolution. You return to the same questions, the same scenes, the same self-interrogations, and they do not get smaller or clearer over time. They get larger, more entrenched, more central to your waking hours. Winch identifies two primary types of post-breakup rumination. Relationship rumination focuses on the relationship itself, replaying the good times, analyzing what went wrong, obsessing over the timeline of the ending. Anger rumination focuses on grievances, on the ways you were wronged, on the elaboration of the ex-partner's faults. Both feel like they're going somewhere. Neither does. The research-supported approach to interrupting rumination is not suppression, not trying to stop the thoughts by force, but redirection. Specifically, distraction that requires sufficient cognitive engagement to occupy the mind, a task, a conversation, a physical activity, anything that creates genuine absorption. The goal is not to avoid feeling. The goal is to interrupt the loop before it completes another cycle and deepens the groove further. Another effective approach is what therapists sometimes call cognitive diffusion, creating some distance between yourself and the ruminating thought rather than engaging with its content. Noticing, I'm having the thought that it was all my fault again, rather than it was all my fault. The subtle shift from being the thought to observing the thought changes your relationship to it. It reduces its authority. And time limits, deliberately constraining the time you give yourself to ruminate, can be a practical bridge strategy. Not suppression, but structure. 20 minutes to feel it fully, and then back to something that requires your presence. This is not about rushing grief. It is about not allowing rumination to colonize the entire day. Section 7, When to Seek Professional Support, 1730 to 1900. For most people, heartbreak, however painful, will move through its most acute phase within a few months, particularly with active healing practices. But there are signs that what's happening has moved beyond ordinary grief and into territory where professional support is genuinely warranted. Prolonged inability to function, weeks of significant difficulty maintaining work, daily responsibilities, or self-care, is a meaningful signal. Not a few hard days. Sustained functional impairment. Persistent hopelessness, the belief, not just as a passing thought, but as a settled conviction, that this pain will never end and that the future will always look like this, warrants attention, particularly if it is accompanied by any thoughts of self-harm. Significant escalation of pre-existing mental health challenges, anxiety, depression, substance use, disordered eating, in the wake of a breakup is an indication that the loss has activated something that requires more support than self-help tools can provide. And the absence of any grief movement, the sense that 6 months or a year out, the pain is exactly as raw and disabling as it was in the first week, is a signal worth paying attention to, particularly if the relationship itself involved significant loss, trauma, or attachment disruption. For therapists, clients navigating significant breakup grief often benefit enormously from a structured, grief-informed framework that normalizes the nonlinearity of the process, addresses the specific behaviors maintaining the wound, and holds the identity piece as a genuine clinical focus alongside the emotional one. The cheat sheet and journal prompts linked in the description were designed to be usable both by individuals and as clinical resources. Outro, 1900 to 2000. Heartbreak is one of the most common human experiences, and one of the least adequately supported. We tend to treat it as something people should simply survive, when the research tells us clearly that it is something people can actually heal from, with real tools and real intention. The pain you're feeling is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It's evidence that you loved something real. And the fact that it hurts this much means there was something genuinely worth grieving, which means there is something genuinely worth rebuilding on the other side of it. Healing is not a straight line and it is not fast. But it is possible. And you don't have to navigate it without a map. The Heartbreak and Breakups cheat sheet, rooted in Winch's work, gives you the science and the tools in one clean reference. And the 36 journal prompts for navigating a breakup give you a way to write your way through it when you're ready to go deeper. Both are linked in the description. If this video helped you feel less alone in what you're carrying, share it with someone who needs it. And I'll see you in the next one.